What's up guys, welcome back. In this video we are going to discuss a topic that I previously mentioned on the channel, which is going to be arm training. I believe that arms are equally as important for aesthetics as back and neck, so if your physique lacks in the arm department, you're probably going to look like shit. Keeping that in mind, I'm going to give you 5 tips or 5 things you should take into account when programming and executing arm work so you can maximize the amount of gains you get. With that in mind, let's begin. The first point is going to be that we already know that chin-ups and dips are not going to suffice to grow your arms, and that you should be including some type of isolation work. But some common pitfalls that people are going to end up in is that they won't approach the sets with a lot of effort, they're not going to be doing a lot of volume, or they're going to be doing too much. They're going to be using improper rep ranges for the resistance curves of the exercises, and as a result, they're not going to be executing the reps with the proper tempo or in the proper fashion. So let's fix each one. In terms of effort per set, what you should be doing is you should be making failure, or at least your reps in reserve, your baseline. This is going to ensure a high set quality, and it's going to allow you to gauge properly your volume tolerance. So make sure you're pushing your sets as hard as humanly possible. The second aspect is going to be volume. Now, this is going to vary from individual to individual, and it's going to also vary from muscle group to muscle group. In my experience, my triceps can take a way more volume than my biceps, and my brachialis can take way less volume than my biceps, and so on and so forth. So what I end up doing is I tend to do higher triceps volume compared to my biceps, and also something you have to take into account is your goals. In this case, I cannot tolerate as much volume as my biceps when it comes to my brachialis and forearms, but I still do the same amount of volume I do for biceps and for brachialis and forearms, because my goal is to overdevelop the triceps and the brachialis to look jacked, well relaxed. So that's also a factor. You have to gauge your volume for each muscle group depending on your own individual tolerance for each muscle group and on your goals. So as a general recommendation, what you can do is 6 to 15 sets and experiment from there. You can increase volume or decrease volume and find your sweet spot. Keep in mind, you always have to keep the set quality, so going to failure. Now, when it comes to programming exercises, you have to take into account the resistance curve of the exercises. Some are going to be mid-length focused, like seated dumbbell curls or easy bar curls. Some are going to be lengthened focused, like incline curls, pelican curls, Bayesian curls. And others are going to be concentric focused, like band curls, push downs, especially push downs where you really lean back and you're like this against the machine. That's going to be more concentric focus. Also, as an example, it's going to be lateral raises, so you can probably see what I mean when I say concentric focus, although that's not an arm exercise. So for the rep ranges, for mid-length movements, you basically want to be going heavier, quote unquote, 6 to 10, 6 to 8. I believe that you can't really go heavy on lengthened focus movements or concentric focus movements without it being counterproductive. I believe that if you're going to go heavy, do it on movements that are either done on cables because they usually have a more homogeneous strength curve, or movements that are going to be mid-length focused. For example, an easy bar curl. So 6 to 10, 6 to 8 for the mid-length movements or for the homogeneous movements. Then for the lengthened focus movements, it's probably going to be more like 8 to 15, 10 to 15. The reason to this is that in the lengthened position, you're going to be at a higher risk of injury. So if you go heavy, there's a higher chance you're going to basically wreck your tendons, either tear them off or get tendonitis. So to avoid that and to promote tendon health, go higher in reps. It's going to be just as stimulatory, if not even more. And on top of that, it's going to allow you to perform the reps properly. Speaking of which, concentric focus movements should be done with an even higher amount of reps, so 10 to 20, 10 to 15, or even 15 to 25. This is if you have tried doing heavy lateral raises, because the hardest part of the movement is going to be the top, the most contracted position, and because of that, most often than not, you're going to be doing like two complete reps, and then you're going to end up doing partials. And what a lot of people end up doing is that they turn it into a cheated movement. So they start doing cheated lateral raises instead of regular lateral raises, which there's nothing wrong with them, but it's not a lateral raise. So if you want to do lateral raises properly, you do higher reps, 15 to 25, 10 to 20. Then you can incorporate some type of intensity technique also if you want to, but again, you want to go higher reps just from the get-go. So to summarize, again, heavy on mid-length, moderate to high on lengthen, and high on concentric. Now, with the tempo you should be performing each rep should be with a slow eccentric, as slow as you can, especially for the heavy movements because they're going to be very stimulatory in the stretched position. Then you pause at the bottom for a second to remove all type of rebound effect, momentum, whatever, and to really control the rep. And then when it comes to the concentric, you want to do it as explosively as possible. So you basically, for example, for a curl, you really let it stretch, you pause at the bottom, and then you explode back up. And that's how you do each rep for all of the movements. The second point we're going to talk about as well is going to be priority. So there's a difference between doing your arm work at the end of the session where you're already fatigued compared to when you're fresh, you haven't done anything yet, and you do it at the start of the session. You're going to have two different set qualities right there. If you start at the beginning, you're going to be fresh, you're going to be able to push your sets very, very, very hard, probably going beyond failure. And then because your muscles, your smaller muscles like your biceps and your triceps are going to be fatigued, when you do your compounds, you're more likely to be a limiting factor, which is going to be way more stimulatory as well for the arms. So what you can do is, if you want to have that effect of carrying it over to the compounds, you can start your session with arms. Do your curls and your push downs first. I would highly recommend doing concentric focus movements in these cases, or at least mid-length or cable movements at the beginning. And then when you do your compounds, you're going to feel your muscles way more. If you don't want that interference, because of course there's going to be some performance decrease because the muscles are already fatigued, you can do arm days. You can separate the upper sessions from the arm sessions, and that way there's not going to be interference with the compounds. Or what you can do as well is you bias the compounds. So let's say you have an upper session that you want to make it more arm focused. Well, you start off, instead of with regular bench, you do close grip bench or reverse grip bench. And instead of doing pull-ups, you do chin-ups, close grip chin-ups. That's going to allow you to get a little bit extra stimulus on the arms without doing isolation at the beginning. You can do it after that. So that's the concept of priority. I actually use the 3 in my program, so that's pretty crazy. The third one is going to be the way you order, for example, for your arm days, the exercises, because it's not the same to start off with a stretch movement, then a heavy movement, and then a pump movement, then to start with a pump movement, then a heavy movement, and then a stretch movement. It's not the same. One's going to be way safer than the other. So what I'm going to recommend is that you either start with a pump movement or a heavy movement at the beginning, depending on how much your tendons are compromised. For example, in my case, my biceps tendons are very resilient, but my triceps tendons are a bitch. So what I end up doing for triceps is I do some type of push downs on the cables to really warm up the elbow, then I move on to my lengthened movements. But for my biceps, I can already start heavy, or I can already start with a stretch focus movement in a lower rep range, like again, 8 to 12 or something like that. Then I follow that up with a stretch movement on the higher reps, right? So 8 to 15, 10 to 15. And then I have what I call a finisher, which is probably going to be a pump movement in a higher rep, like 10 to 20, 10 to 15. And it's usually stricter. So this will probably look something like your push downs, right? 6 to 8 or 6 to 10, or a JM press in the same rep range, depending on how much my elbows can take it. Easy bar extensions, in the 8 to 12 or 8 to 15 rep range. And then we finish off with either band pushdowns or unilateral cable pushdowns in the 10 to 20 zone for each side. So that's a simple template you can follow. The exercise order is very important. So you basically warm up the area first, either with pump movements or with a heavy movement. that is not going to be very taxing on the tendon. Then you move on to your stretch movements, and then you have your finisher, which is going to be way more strict and higher in reps. Then the fourth point is going to be using beyond failure techniques. I have made a full video on that you can check. It's the previous video to this one. But basically the ones I would recommend specifically for arm isolation is going to be myo reps, partials, and assisted concentrics. Especially for ring work, I think that assisted concentrics may work really well. You can do your ring extensions, and once you fail, you keep doing like assisted concentrics until you're basically destroyed. Also, you can incorporate here mechanical drop sets for ring work if you want to as well, but for cables and dumbbells, I wouldn't really recommend doing drop sets. I would highly recommend just do partials and myo reps. That's going to be more than enough. And that's the last point, which is going to be the less relevant, but the one that's also going to give you some results as well. It's going to give you like an extra 5%. It's going to be to apply nucleus overload. So this principle is basically incorporating some type of high frequency work so you can keep stimulating the muscle and drive certain adaptations that are going to induce a certain muscle memory effect that's going to allow you to get more growth. Team 3D Alpha has like a full 1.5 hour video about that, so go check it out. But basically, the way I approach it is I do sets of 15 to 30 reps. I do it as frequently as possible, so you can be twice in a day if you want to, every single day, or sometimes going to be just 4 times a week on top of your regular sessions. So this is on top of what you're already doing. And then when it comes to RPE, I'm going to tell you to not use RPE and just chase the pump. In this case, this should be supplementary work, not your main work. So your main sets, or the thing that is going to be the most stimulatory, is going to be taken to failure with proper sets, with a varied rep range, with proper resistance curves and proper rep ranges, with proper tempo, with its priority. But then you can add some supplementary work that's going to be nucleus overload, higher reps, you're going for the pump, and you do it as frequently as possible to add more ineffective reps. So those are the 5 points I wanted to talk about in this video. Hope it's useful for you and hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, leave me your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for watching.